Hey everybody, Dr. G here. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and body language expert, and today we're going to be analyzing the Congressional hearing on UFOs, or more precisely, UAPs. You may have seen my previous video on the interview from News Nation with David Grusch. Today we're going to be getting a much better baseline. We're going to be watching a lot more footage of Mr. Grusch, as well as two other individuals providing testimony. I do want to say before we get started, normally I cover true crime videos, so this is a couple of days late because it's been a very busy week for true crime. Hopefully you learned something from this video. I'll be really interested to get your feedback. I've read all of the comments from my last video, and I'm going to incorporate explaining some things people had questions about over the course of this video. Last thing before we get started, I do want to remind you to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, let's go. Today we're analyzing the testimony of three different individuals: Lieutenant Ryan Graves, former Senior Intelligence Officer David Grusch, and retired Commander David Fravor. So part of the goal of this video is to identify if there are any overt signs of lying and deception. One thing to keep in mind is they are under oath. This is no joke. These individuals could be in serious trouble if they are in fact lying or being deceptive. So I do take what we're talking about today very, very seriously. Let's go ahead and listen to some of Lieutenant Graves' testimony.
Chairman Grothman, Ranking Member Garcia, distinguished members of the House Oversight Subcommittee on National Security, Representatives Burchett and Luna. My name is Ryan Fobbs Graves, and I'm a former F-18 pilot with a decade of service in the U.S. Navy, including 2 deployments in Operation Enduring Freedom and Operation Inherent Resolve.
So the first thing we're going to notice as we develop a baseline for Lieutenant Graves is that he is sitting with his hands open, so his body is open. Oftentimes we associate when people leave their body open that they are being vulnerable, because if the head and the chest are vital parts of the body. If you get injured there, you're in trouble. So when people sit with their bodies open, we see that as a positive side towards truthfulness. Let's keep going.
I have experienced advanced UAP firsthand, and I'm here to voice the concerns of more than 30 commercial aircrew and military veterans who have confided their similar encounters with me.
So another aspect of his baseline that we need to pay a lot of attention to is the fact that he does not move much. But do understand that when he moves, it's significant because he's somebody that doesn't move a lot, which is very different than someone like David Grusch, who moves a lot. So as Lieutenant Graves continues to provide information, we're going to be looking for subtle body language. We're going to be looking for smaller movements that are probably going to mean more than they might from somebody else. Let's keep watching.
Today, I would like to highlight 3 critical issues that demand our action. As we convene here, UAP are in our airspace, but they are grossly underreported. These sightings are not rare or isolated, they are routine. Military aircrew and commercial pilots, trained observers whose lives depend on accurate identification, are frequently witnessing these phenomena.
Now, this was interesting. When he said frequently observing these phenomena, I'm going to go back and show it to you again. He raised his eyebrows. Now, there's several things that eyebrow raises can mean. One, it can mean surprise, because when we're surprised, we raise our eyebrows. That is when that emotion is connected to that facial expression. Another thing it can do is to draw attention to us. So if he's doing that, it either means that he's surprised by the information he's providing, or that it's something he wants to emphasize greatly, and that's why he's raising his eyebrows. Let's watch him say that again.
Observers whose lives depend on accurate identification are frequently witnessing these phenomena.
So the emphasis on frequently makes me think that that is a sign of surprise. And that means that he is surprised by the idea that people are frequently observing this.
During a training mission in Warning Area Whiskey 72, 10 miles off the coast of Virginia Beach, 2 F-18 Super Hornets were split by a UAP. The object.
Now that was, once again, a look of surprise. Watch this. Watch his eyebrows as he's talking about what happened.
Coast of Virginia Beach, 2 F-18 Super Hornets were split by a UAP.
The idea that Super Hornets were swept by a UAP, or I think that's what he said. It was hard to understand. But the idea that the Super Hornets were cut off by a UAP or whatever happened, that was surprising to him. So it's very interesting. These are real natural reactions, because the more involuntary a reaction is, the more genuine it is. That's the whole point of reading body language. We can also see when someone is overtly trying to manipulate. We haven't seen anything like that so far. Now let's watch a little bit of Mr. Grusch. We're going to be going back and forth between all 3 of them, but now we're going to introduce his testimony.
Mr. Chairman, ranking members and congressmen, thank you. I'm happy to be here. This is an important issue, and I'm grateful for your time.
All right, he's already moved probably more than Lieutenant Graves did during his entire opening statements. One thing I want you to notice about David Grusch, and obviously I did analysis on him previously, so as you can see, his baseline body language is a little bit different. He's got his hands crossed, or his hands interlocked sometimes, but when he talks, he opens up his hands for emphasis. Once again, While slightly different, that's similar in terms of we're seeing that somebody is allowing themselves to be vulnerable. When he speaks with his hands open and he's talking with two hands, we see that as a genuine attempt at emphasis. One hand, we tend to think, is a little less committed. But when David Grusch talks this time, he's speaking with both hands very strongly. Let's watch that again, and then we'll keep going.
Mr. Chairman, ranking members and congressmen, thank you. I'm happy to be here. This is an important issue, and I'm grateful for your time. My name is David Charles Grusch. I was an intelligence officer for 14 years, both in the U.S. Air Force, both active.
Okay, so him opening his body repeatedly is something he's doing consistently. He's going to do this fairly consistently throughout the hearing. Now, you'll notice his eyebrows is a little bit different. His eyebrows are consistently raised. Now, this isn't a look of surprise. I think this is a look of emphasis to draw attention to what he's talking about. He's somebody that I think feels very strongly. He moves his hands a lot. He's very emphatic. He has a lot of inflection in his voice. He doesn't seem to be trying to hide any of how he feels.
Duty Air National Guard and Reserve at the rank of major, and most recently from 2021 to 2025, or excuse me, 2023.
Now, that was kind of funny. So he said 2025. I don't think he's actually a time traveler, but I do think that we can make natural mistakes. I do not think that that implies in any way that he's being deceptive. I think that's a normal slip of the tongue. So let's watch it again regardless.
From 2021 to 2025, or excuse me, 2023, at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, NGA, at the GS-15 civilian level, which is the military equivalent of a full bird colonel. At the time, due to my extensive executive level intelligence support duties, I was cleared to literally all relevant compartments.
Okay, so when he says literally all and he really opens his body up, that's an emphasis that I think is likely true. So he was really opened up to many things. And that's something that he wants people to know. He wants to provide emphasis on that. And as I've said before, these are involuntary behaviors. That didn't look like an emphasis that he was trying to do. That looked like it just sort of came out because of what he's feeling right there. And so when we're looking for trustworthy body language, that's exactly what we look for.
And in a position of extreme trust, both in my military and civilian capacities.
I want to first thank you for the invitation to speak to the committee on the UAP topic that's been in the news for the past 6 years and seems to be continuing to gain momentum.
So I've had somebody ask me about this hand position that he has. He's sort of holding his thumb. I think that's just a way that we manage anxiety when we're in situations like that. I'm not saying he's necessarily strongly feeling anxiety. I mean, being a commander or retired commander, I'm sure he's been in some stressful situations.
As you know, my name is David Fravor. I'm a retired commander in the United States Navy. In 2004, I was a commanding officer of Strike Fighter Squadron 41, the world-famous Black Aces. We were attached to Carrier Wing 11, stationed on board the USS Nimitz.
So you're seeing his eyebrows go up and down. It could just be because he's doing that when he looks up to speak to people. It could also just be that he is wanting people to pay attention to what he's saying because he knows it's important. So I don't think of those on him as looking like he's surprised when he's talking about these things, at least not in this context. And because surprise and emphasis can look so similar, it can be difficult to tell them apart, but sometimes, given the involuntary nature of it, we can point out things that do genuinely look more like surprise than emphasis. Let's keep going.
And had begun a 2-month workup cycle off the coast of California. On this day, we were scheduled for a 2v2 air-to-air training with the USS Princeton as our control. As we proceeded to the west, the air controller was counting down the range to an object that we were going to, and we were unaware of what we were going to see when we arrived.
So I talk about head nods and head shakes sometimes, which I know drives people a little bit nuts, but he emphasized the right parts when he was shaking his head no. We listen to this part again.
The controller was counting down the range to an object that we were going to, and we were unaware of what we were going to see when we arrived.
So they were, I believe that they were genuinely unaware of what they were going to see when they arrived. I think that he was emphasizing that in a way that seemed very natural. Okay, but talking about this appears to cause him a little bit of stress. You see that grab of the chin. I don't want to overemphasize too many things, but it is important that everything has some kind of meaning. And talking about this in a public setting in front of Congress and the world as everyone is watching is bound to be stressful. So as we see a pacifying behavior like that, I don't think of that as meaning lying or deception, particularly given this context. To me, that just says this is something that's very important to him, or this is something that has a lot of significance. So let's watch that again.
What we were going to see when we arrived. The controller had told us that these objects had been observed for over 2 weeks, coming down from over 80,000 feet, rapidly descending to 20,000 feet, hanging out for hours, and then going straight back up. For those who don't realize, above 80,000 feet is space. We arrived at the location at approximately 20,000 feet.
And you see the him touching his neck like that or reaching for it very briefly. Once again, that's a way to feel calm when we're talking about something. If you've been through something like this and you remember it and you're thinking back on it, and at the time your heart was pounding because it was something that was wild, it's not surprising that he would actually reach back to touch his neck when talking about something like this. He's not doing it consistently. He's probably trying to reduce the adrenaline load that's happening as he's talking about this, even if he remembers some of it. So that's interesting.
In a controller called merge plot, which means that our radar blip was now in the same resolution cell as the contact. We proceeded around the circle about 90 degrees from the start of our descent, and the object suddenly shifted its longitudinal axis.
Now, see, it's interesting because this story is so visceral to him that he actually moves his hand while he's talking about it. As I said, emotions are connected to our bodies. When we think or feel something, sometimes we act it out. And it was interesting that as he talked about that, he emphasized it with his hand. Watch him talk about this again.
Of our descent, and the object suddenly shifted its longitudinal axis, aligned it with my aircraft, and began to climb.
So that is so connected to emotion that he had to move his hand when talking about it. And that's interesting because he does have a prepared statement. He doesn't have to give any color to what it's doing, but there is so much feeling tied to it, he automatically does. I think that's really interesting.
We continued down another 270 degrees, nose low.
That were detecting these objects off the eastern seaboard. They were further correlating that information with the other onboard sensors. Now, that was our personal first-hand experience at the time. Since then, as I've engaged this topic, others have reached out to me to share their experiences, both.
Now, he sat back, he moved his hands, which is unusual for him because his baseline tends to be so still. That's a point that he really wants to emphasize, what had happened before and what we're doing since. Watch this.
These objects. Now, that was our personal first-hand experience at the time. Since then, as I've engaged this topic, others have reached out to me to share their experiences, both on the military side as well as the commercial aviation side.
So he finds this to be an incredibly important point in his testimony because I believe that's genuinely the first time we've really seen him move so far. And so whenever there's that much energy, that needs to be a point that's emphasized. That's something that's very important to him.
Would then accelerate to supersonic speeds, 1.1, 1.2 Mach. And they would do so in very erratic and quick behaviors that I don't have an explanation for.
Okay.
And so you saw him close his eyes when he said that. I don't have an explanation for. That is distressing to him. Oftentimes we close our eyes when we think or hear things that we don't like. So the idea that he can't explain something, that something can go that fast, and that he's not able to explain why that is distressing to him, understandably given what he does. But watch this part again.
Would then accelerate to supersonic speeds, 1.1, 1.2 Mach. And they would do so in very erratic and quick behaviors that I don't have an explanation for.
On these lines.
Yeah, I have to be careful what I say in detail because there is an open whistleblower reprisal investigation on my behalf, and I don't want to compromise that investigation by providing anything that may...
What we're seeing now is an actual sign of fear. Let me go back and show you this. He's talking about there being the open investigation on the reprisal and all of that. It sounds like he's saying that there have been consequences for him coming forward. Watch the corners of his mouth right before this. They're going to go down like this because when you think about fear, people's eyebrows raise up, their mouth goes back. That is a look of fear. So just watch this.
And I don't want to compromise that investigation by providing anything that may help provide somebody information. But it was very brutal.
And I didn't really make anything of that brief laugh. That's just a pretty normal way to communicate. I'm not making too much of that.
And very unfortunate, some of the tactics they used to hurt me both professionally and personally, to be quite frank. Yeah.
And for me, it was special because I recognized the voices on the video. I recognized the video itself. I had seen it when it was taken. I'd seen it when it was debriefed. And so that was kind of shook me because I realized that this problem was...
So for anybody who's concerned that he might be making up a story around this, once again, he's not somebody that moves a lot. His baseline is very still. So when he talks about that it shook him and he opens his body up, particularly when he's talking about something, a real emotion of feeling uncomfortable, and he's opening his body up, which is a vulnerable act, that's really something that you can trust. So I genuinely do believe that when he saw, and I think he's referring to when there was something in the New York Times a few years ago about UAPs, that really genuinely had an effect on him. Watch him do this again.
And so that was kind of shook me because I realized that this problem was still ongoing. And so I reached out to colleagues back on the East Coast. Dark gray or black cubes inside of a clear sphere.
I'm sorry, dark gray or black cubes?
Yes, inside of a clear sphere, where the apex or tips of the cube were touching the inside of that sphere.
And now I want to show this also. And I hate to keep going back to the fact that he's moving his hands or he's opening his body because I don't want it to feel too repetitive, but I think this is important because this is a more sensational description, right? He's talking about cubes inside of a sphere, and that's a little bit stranger. But that's when he's allowing himself to open up. So once again, those are the areas where I'm really looking for signs of deception, where I'm looking for times that he would be trying to close his body, trying to pacify himself, that he's feeling uncomfortable if he's telling something that's not true. But he very much seems to believe exactly what he's saying.
And that was primarily what was being reported when we were able to gain a visual tally of these objects. And that occurred over almost 8 years. And as far as I know, it's still occurring.
Colleagues of mine that have, privately messaged me, and I do appreciate that. But I do have knowledge of active planned reprisal activity against myself and other colleagues, and it's very, very upsetting to me.
Now, once again, I talked a lot about head shakes and head nods. As you can see, he was nodding his head as he was talking about this, and when he did this, to me, once again, that was emphasis. That was different than what I observed last time, just to be clear.
And reprisal activity against myself and other colleagues, and it's very, very upsetting to me.
Coming from where?
There were certain colleagues of mine that were brutally administratively attacked, and it actually makes me very upset as a leader to see that happen to other coworkers and actually.
So when he said, that actually makes me feel very upset, like I talked about when people touch their neck or their face, that helps them calm down, that sign shows that he really is genuinely feeling upset about it. He's not actually going through with touching himself to feel pacified, but it's a genuine reaction.
Superiors of mine over the last 3 years.
Do you have knowledge or do you have reason to believe that there are programs in the advanced tech space that are unsanctioned?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
That's a pretty strong statement. So, I take all of this very seriously with what he's saying. I think the weight of this congressional hearing is very different than his News Nation interview. He's making some very strong accusations at this point. Let's keep going.
Yeah.
And when you say that they're above congressional oversight, what do you mean?
Congressional reporting. However, the Gang of Eight is at least supposed to be notified if a waived or wave-bigoted, unacknowledged SAP is created, and that's public law.
Well, so that how does, I don't want to cut you off, but.
Once again, you'll see his mouth does this afterward. This is something that he feels fear about as he's talking about it. Watch this.
However, the Gang of Eight is at least supposed to be notified if a waived or wave-bigoted, unacknowledged SAP is created, and that's public law.
Well, so that how does, I don't want to cut you off, but how does a program like that get funded?
I will give you generalities. I can get very specific in a closed session, but misappropriation of funds and.
Once again, there's that fear. And understandably, he's talking about some very heavy, very significant things, particularly if he said he has paid a personal and professional price for this. So this is very interesting to see his body language in this setting.
I've seen multiple cases, some of which, to my understanding, and of course, I left NGA in April, so that's my information cutoff date. But I personally.
Now, this is also a sign that we see related to honesty. He's putting his hands up. And we see this if somebody's been accused of doing something and they say, I didn't do it, we associate that with being more likely to be true. Obviously, no body language is universal. The idea is that we're observing body language that is unconscious. So if somebody was to ask him this question and he was behaving in a way intentionally and putting his hands up, that's very different than an immediate reaction. And what he appears to be doing is an immediate and involuntary reaction.
And of course, I left NGA in April, so that's my information cutoff date. But I personally reviewed both what we call overhead collection and from other.
It also led to the Whistleblower Protection Act and the NDAA. There are multiple witnesses coming forward to say.
So as you can see, he reached back and is holding onto his thumb again. And this could just be for comfort, which is fine. I'm not saying this in a critical way, but I think that as he's talking about the Whistleblower Act, when he's talking about the repercussions for talking and discussing these things, I think that's a point of anxiety, as it would be for anybody in this situation. I don't see the way he's doing that as he's uncomfortable because he's being deceptive. I think he's uncomfortable because he's talking about the repercussions of doing this, basically.
That have firsthand knowledge, and Mr. Grusch just covered that. What concerns me is that there's no oversight from our elected officials on anything associated with our government processing or working on craft.
And so basically calling out the government officials and saying that there's no oversight talking about this publicly has got to be anxiety provoking. So I attribute the way he's doing his hands right now to that very thing.
Okay. You've stated that the government is in possession of potentially non-human spacecraft. Based on your experience and extensive conversations with experts, do you believe our government has made contact with intelligent extraterrestrials?
Something I can't discuss in public setting.
So as we see the lip pursing, I've talked before about how that's stress or how it means not wanting to say something. Doesn't imply deception in this situation necessarily, but he is not going to say anything right now, and he's showing you that.
Okay, I can't ask when you think this occurred. If you believe we have crashed craft, stated earlier, do we have the bodies of the pilots who piloted this craft?
As I've stated publicly already in my News Nation interview, biologics came with some of these recoveries. Yeah.
So that was interesting. That's contrasted with the way that I had talked about it last time. When we saw the News Nation interview, I didn't think that his body language was naturally connected to what he was saying, demonstrating truthfulness. This time, it very much was. It's very interesting to contrast the way he was last time versus this time.
Were they, I guess, human or non-human biologics?
Non-human, and that was the assessment of people with direct knowledge on the program I talked to that are currently still on the program.
And was this documentary evidence, this video, photos, eyewitness? Like, how would that be determined?
The specific documentation I would have to talk to you in a skiff about.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I could go through and analyze the entire congressional hearing, and if there really is interest out there, I can do that. But based on what we've seen, the body language is very consistent in the other areas, because I have watched this entire thing. There's no overt signs of lying and deception. This is an analysis of the body language, by the way. If you think that they are being truthful or not truthful based on the content of what is being said, that's really not what I'm analyzing. I'm not analyzing whether or not I think that what they're saying is possible or true or any of those things. I'm trying to analyze if their body language suggests truthfulness. And based on this testimony, all three of them are demonstrating truthful body language. They showed anxiety and stress at times, but not anxiety and stress that was consistent with manipulation, deceit, or lying. So my conclusions that they weren't showing any signs of lying and deception may surprise you, because after the News Nation interview, I wasn't convinced. Now, I'm not saying one way or the other whether I'm convinced about what they're talking about, but I would say that their body language showed no signs of lying and deception. If you guys want me to analyze more, or if there's other people you want me to analyze, I'm happy to do so. Please let me know in the comments below what you think, and if there are other people that you'd like me to analyze, or if you want me to analyze more of this. So I do want to remind you, it's possible that they are not telling the truth and not showing it, or it's possible that they believe what they're saying and they're mistaken. There's a lot of different possibilities for what's happening, but I will say that we didn't see any overt signs of lying, deception, or manipulation in their body language today during this hearing. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and don't forget to like and subscribe if you want to see more content just like this. All right, thanks for watching.